as well. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me. Like I said, I know it's extremely busy this time of year with families enrolling and trying to get services, supplies, things like that. So I know it is crazy out there in the field. I do appreciate you taking the time this hour to join us for ARP Homeless. Ed has sent out new guidance about allowable use of funds. And then also we're going to talk about late liquidation in regards to ARP Homeless. So we'll go ahead and get started. At the Tennessee Department of Education, we ground our work in our strategic plan, Best for All. The plan focuses on 3 priorities: academics, student readiness, and educators for all Tennessee students. As you all know, the work you're doing with students in transition is strongly connected to all 3 of these areas. The support that you provide to educators, students, and families is crucial. So today we're going to talk about ARP Homeless Period of Performance. We're going to look at allowable use of funds. We're going to talk about ARP Homeless 1 and 2 and System Navigator Late Liquidation Extension. We're going to talk about the FER and carryover applications, test your knowledge at the end, and then have questions, resources, and closing. Then, of course, at any time, you can drop questions you have in the chat box or unmute your line. So we're going to talk about the period of performance. Uniform Grants Guidance defines period of performance as the time in which a grantee may incur obligations for the work of the grant. Grant funds must not be used for materials, supplies, or services received outside the period of performance. So here are the periods of performance for relief funds administered by FPO. All ARP Homeless funds are obligated by September 30, 2024, and liquidated on December 15th, 2024. The little side note to that is the recommended date by FPO, December 15th, so that we have time to move funds around and adequately close down funding. So LEAs that apply for and receive late liquidation past the liquidation date will have till March 2026. Again, note that asterisk is for December 15th is for a recommended date. Obligation of funds. So when something is liquidated, 1, a service occurred or a material is received. For 2, a payment has been made to a vendor or provided. And finally, 3, a reimbursement request has been made to the state. All 3 of these must occur for funds to be liquidated. Again, December 15th is a recommended liquidation date for all ARP homeless funds. Obligation of funds. I'm sorry, I didn't advance my slide. Okay. So here are some examples of when funds are actually considered as obligated. I'm going to let you take just a second to read the chart, and I want you to take note of the personnel services by a contractor. And so these are when you obligate your funds. Liquidation of funds is when something is liquidated. A service occurred or a material is received, a payment has been made to a vendor or a provider, and finally, a reimbursement request has been made to the state. All 3 of these must occur for funds to be liquidated. I feel like I just said that, but if I have not, I apologize. Again, December 15th is liquidation date for all ARP homeless funds. LEAs can carry out grant activities during the liquidation if the funds have been properly obligated. This includes contracted services and receipt of goods. The period for delivery of goods and services and the associated payments for these goods and services can be extended to the end of the liquidation period, again, as long as it's been properly obligated. LEAs may request an obligation extension. The U.S. Department of Education does not have the authority to change the obligation deadline as it is set in statute and may not be changed without legislative action. LEAs, however, can request a liquidation date extension. The U.S. Department of Education has the authority to approve properly obligated funds upon review of a written request made by the grantee, which is the department on behalf of itself and its LEAs. Should funds be properly and timely obligated by September 30 of 2024, the department has the authority to approve liquidation extension requests based upon the specific facts and circumstances of given obligation and upon written request of a grantee. So let me quickly recap the liquidation. A contract with an organization or agency for items or services is considered a timely obligation of funds if a binding written commitment has been signed by September 30, 2024. Even if the items or services will not be provided until after September 30 during the liquidation period. Under the statute, funds for the rental of real or personal property are not obligated until the property is used. So a contract with a motel to prepay for rooms, for example, would not be timely obligation of funds. However, an LEA may contract with a community-based organization to provide short-term housing placement services, for example, placement of students in motel rooms for students experiencing homelessness. If a binding written commitment contract is signed by September 30 of 2024, this would be a valid obligation because the contract is for the provision of services. So now let's look a little, let's take a little refresher on the allowable use of funds and the updated guidance from ED. All homeless programming funds are meant to facilitate the identification, enrollment, retention, and education success of homeless children and youth through wraparound services, contracts with community-based organizations, supplies, clothing, personal care, glasses, transportation. All allowable use of funds under ARP Homeless apply to the education of homeless children and youth, except for the provision of short-term temporary housing, which would be several nights in a hotel, which will be allowable in the light of COVID pandemic. However, it has made an exception to extend hotels while we're not putting families in hotels for COVID related reasons. It's more for educational purposes to keep them in their school of origin as best they can. So pandemic does not necessarily apply now to hotels, motels. Cell phones and other technology devices, reliable high-speed internet, short-term, again, temporary housing up to 3 nights. ED has allowed for an extension of the 3 nights. If you complete a pre-approval request through the department, the review team can review it, and you can have up to a 2-week stay in a hotel motel. Again, if you do a pre-approval request, you will need to provide details about the cost, the reasoning, and the justification for an extended hotel beyond the 3 nights. LEAs may use prepaid or obligate any necessary or LEAs may use prepaid cards or obligate a obligation as necessary and reasonable based on the recent school year data. So you can buy prepaid cards, but they have to make sure that you're aligning with your data. You can't just go buy a slew of cards and use them for the remainder of the 2024-25 school year. It has to reflect that it is part of your data and it's reasonable and necessary. LEAs must implement strong internal controls, such as collecting receipts from families, collecting receipts directly from the store, forms used by tracking store cards, signatures from person or family that use the store card, if it's an LEA staff member. When I attend the state coordinator's office hours, that is something they strongly encourage, is that you have a very strong internal control over your store card, your prepaid or store cards that are being used. These debit store cards are to be used for the needs of school-aged children and youth, and family members benefit only incidentally. All items listed above must be pre-approved from the department, and ed approvals will be issued on a case-by-case basis, and requesting approval for a purchase of, for example, hotels, minor car repairs, LEA vehicles, treatments of bed bugs or lice, computer labs for homeless students, things like that. That will all need to be provided in a pre-approval with detailed justification, data to show that support, and how it's directly supporting the educational need of the student. Once the form has been reviewed by the review team here at the department, the McKinney-Vento grant manager will follow up with an email and next steps for proceeding. Remember that full participation and engagement is the overreaching goal of all McKinney-Vento funding. Keep typical allowable expenses with extraordinary circumstances in mind, including professional services, other purchase services, general supplies, and transportation. Sustaining ARP homeless long term. So I have sent a lot of information out from the National Center for Homeless Education about sustaining your ARP homeless funding, as well as information that has been provided by Ed. And so some ways that they have encouraged us to encourage LEAs is build out your relationships with your community partners. While you have the additional staff to help with that and build those strong relationships, that way, once if you're paying for a position, once that person is no longer available to help with homeless programming, you have built relationships with community partners, and you'll be able to successfully have support and have built those relationships. And so, if you haven't already looked at the report that was provided by the National Center for Homeless Education, I highly encourage you to take some time to go look at that. It does give some strategies beyond community-based organizations, or things that you can do with them to build those strong connections. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that. And then, of course, for your short-term sustainability, looking at the immediate sustainability for LEAs that currently have the McKinney-Vento subgrant, you will have an additional 12 months of obligation per the FY24 Consolidated Application Act. FY24 McKinney-Vento subgrants have September 30 of 2026 to obligate those funds, and then FY25 will have until September 30 of 2027. So that's something, if you have the subgrant to look at to help sustain some of these short-term funds. And then ARP Homeless and FY23 McKinney-Vento subgrant funds will need to be obligated again by September 30 of 2024. Okay, so let's look at ARP Homeless 1 and 2 and System Navigator liquidation extension. My apologies that this System Navigator is not on the slide. That was a last minute approval from Ed that Systems Navigator could be in the late liquidation extension. So that is part of this as well. So liquidation extension facts, under a liquidation extension of up to 14 additional months if approved by the department. Some grantees, which are LEAs, will have additional time to draw down COVID relief funds, so timely obligation activities can be paid. And subgrantees will have additional time to carry out contracts or other properly made obligations for allowable activities when these obligations were made on or before the statutory deadline of September 30, 2024 for all ARP homeless funds. Subgrantees will have additional time to draw down COVID relief funds. Have time to draw down COVID relief funds so timely obligated activities can be paid. A bus or vehicle that has not arrived due to supply chain issues. Subgrantees will have additional time to carry out contracts or other property obligations for allowable activities when those obligations were made on or before statutory deadline. A contract with a vendor or community-based organization, CBO, for tutoring services or other wraparound supports. A contract with a vendor for professional development, homeless student identification software are just a few examples of the properly obligated and can be put into late liquidation. The examples mentioned above must meet all applicable guidelines and approvals from the department. You can also see the Ed frequently asked questions for a late liquidation request. So we know items and services must be initially received during the period of performance, but how long may they continue? We have a link to a frequently asked questions from Ed, what covers these questions. It may be allowable to continue after the obligation or liquidation period. And then you can read the slide deck here to kind of see some examples. Yes, for liquidation extension, Lord, I'm getting tongue-tied now. Ongoing tutoring services, ongoing mental health services, non-employee administered ARP homeless and ESSER programs, ongoing professional development, no for late liquidation extension for employee pay and benefits, for
Hello?
travel.
Yeah, I'm on a work meeting. You should have known that. No, I'm just on my computer. I muted it.
Okay. So no for lodge mileage per diem, solely needing more time to expend funds. That is not adequate justification for late liquidation. So rather, late liquidation requests must be aligned to specific contracts, specific projects, or other expenses based on properly obligated funds. I can't say that enough. They have to be properly obligated in order to be eligible for late liquidation. So some factors to consider when you're doing a late extension request is activities must meet the purpose of the grant to prepare for, respond to, or prevent COVID-19. Activities must meet the intent of the grant in accordance with the scope of the pandemic. For example, activities that promote social distancing or large-scale purchases. Again, we're not doing PPP necessarily right now because it's really not the biggest piece of code anymore. And now it's more of housing situation based on people being evicted during COVID and have not bounced back from that, or the cost of housing has not allowed them to get back into housing. And then contract terms may not change after September 30th, 2024. So whatever contract you have binding with your community-based organization, that is what is in writing and will have to stay until the late liquidation has ended. So the late liquidation extension tool is an e-plan. You can find that in data information. It'll be under 2025 ARP Homeless Liquidation Extension Request. That is not opened yet, but it will be opening soon. It'll open October 15th of this year. Requests will be due on December 15th of 2024. And the department must make one request to Ed for all extensions. So all of the state requests will be sent in no later than December 15th of 2024 so that Ed can approve the state's request. Here is a screenshot of where to find the extension request tool. So the definition obligation overview and assistant attestation page, definitions of obligation and liquidation, chart of examples, assurances page. This is all going to be in your liquidation extension tool that you understand to your knowledge that your information that you're providing is accurate and that you've also obligated these funds properly by September 30 of 2024. And then you have your funding page where it's going to have your summary of funding, ARP Homeless 1 and 2 allocation totals, as well as your System Navigator. So it's going to show you those are going to be pre-populated into the instrument. You're going to see how much money was initially awarded, what allocations have been made, the amount obligated by September 30th, amount liquidated by September 30th of 2024, and the remaining balance that needs to be liquidated. So all that will be preloaded into the application, and then you'll have to complete the amount that you're requesting for extension, the account number, line item, budget narrative, all of those things in order to apply for the late liquidation extension. And then here is, again, a screenshot of the application and what will be in there for you to complete. Again, I will cover this in a little bit, but the more detail you can provide into those budget narratives and justification, the more likely it is for the department and Ed to approve your late liquidation extension request. So related documents that will need to be included with your request are supporting documentation that shows that you properly obligated the funds by September 30 of 2024. That would be your purchase orders, your contracts for services, documents supporting the delay in receiving services, if applicable, anything you have documentation wise to show that you obligated those funds. Those will be required in the related document area where you upload those for the department. And this shows the supporting documentation as well. So considerations during the request development is approval is a function of completeness of the information and timeliness, validation of the obligation. LEAs must provide enough specificity to clearly indicate the properly and timely obligations. Additional details is necessary when referring to costs related to personnel services. So here's an example provided by Ed. The top screenshot is lacking clarification information. So this is what Ed has provided. You can see the top, it shows that it's the very least amount that they provided. Temping staff cost, we're able to spend these funds with more time. And so what Ed has come back and asked was, how were the temp staffing costs obligated? Phrasing it, will be able to spend these funds with more time implies that the funds were not obligated in a timely manner. And were the funds listed for supplies, materials, or temps, staffing costs properly obligated? So what Ed is suggesting is that a stronger request would be the bottom screenshot where you put justification, a clear narrative about your justification and the need, as well as the use of funds, clearly showing that it is for mental health, telehealth services, that were delayed by chain supply issues. Do you have any questions at this point? So let's look at ARP Homeless Fur and carryover applications. This chart shows you the options you have for furs. Most of you have not spent all of your funding, so option one would probably not apply to many of you. But if you have completed spending all of your funds, your FERS will be due October 1st of 2024, and that will end the ARP Homeless once you've closed out that application. For anyone else, option two, you were not able to obligate all your funds by June 30, and so your new FER date your FER date would be for August 1, which is today. All FERS are due today. FY25 funding application will be due on August 30th of 2024. So all your FY25 ARP applications will be needed to be submitted to the department for review by close of business day, August 30th. And then all your funds will need to be obligated September 30th of 2024 and liquidated by September 15th, 2024. And then your last option is if you have late liquidation. So again, your first still going to be due on August 1st of 2024. Your funds will still need to, your application will still need to be due to the department by August 30th. The only addition to this would be that if you are granted a late liquidation extension, that you will have until March 28th of 2026 to liquidate those funds, and further guidance will be provided once we get closer to that time for completing your FERS. All ARP homeless FERS are due again today, August 1st. When this occurs, your application will automatically be placed in revision started status. So LEAs who elect to receive additional ARP homeless funds will see the additional funding added starting mid-August. The fiscal team will be adding, so in the allocation adjustment forms that you guys completed, you acknowledge that you would like to receive any additional ARP funding, and that will be added in mid-August. If no changes are being made to your FY24 ARP homeless funding application, then LEAs may carry over the spending plan narratives, and information will all be forwarded over to your FY25 application. All FY25 ARP Homeless and System Navigator funding applications must be submitted again by August 30th, and then obligated by September 30, 2024. New to the FY24 application is the obligation requirements page. Liaisons will ensure that they have properly obligated their funds by clicking that document saying that, or that box saying that you have, at your best knowledge, have obligated all your funds by September 30 of 2024, and that you understand that no salaries or benefits will be paid after September 30 of 2024. All right, so let's test our knowledge. The obligation date for ARP homeless funds is subject to change with a liquidation extension. Is that true or false? Drop your answer in the chat box. The obligation date for ARP homeless funds is subject to change with a liquidation extension. Okay, we're seeing false in the chat box. That is correct. False. The obligation date is September 30, 2024, and is set in statute. Therefore, it will not change. Liquidation extension only allows LEAs to have additional time to liquidate funds that were properly obligated by September 30, 2024. That should have been a question I asked. What is properly obligation date? LEAs who wish to complete an FY25 carryover application but will not apply for late liquidation must have their ARP Homeless 1.0, 2.0, and System Navigator funds liquidated by which date? Now remember, it's liquidated by. What day do you have to have your funds liquidated by? Okay. I see that in the chat, most everyone is picking D, and that is correct. D is December 15th, which is a recommended department date for the final obligation recommended. LEAs not completing a carryover application must liquidate by, that's not July 26th. I'm not sure where that date came from. Must liquidate by December 15th of 2024. That is in my notes. I wrote the wrong information. So payroll expenses for employees paid from ARP Homeless 1.0, 2.0, or Systems Navigator may not be charged to the grant for services provided through the 24-25 school year. Is that true or false? We got one answer, one false in the box. Anyone else want to see if they Got that one? Okay, the answer for this is true. Payroll expenses are obligated on the day in which the work is performed. Therefore, they must stop on or before September 30, 2024. So if you're paying someone out of ARP Homeless for your Systems Navigator or out of your one or two funding pots, they will no longer be able to be funded out of ARP Homeless after September 30th. On October 1, they will have to have a new pay source. All right, let's do some questions. Anybody have any questions? I know I got a little confusing there on some of the slides, but any questions that I can clarify for you at this time? Unmute your line or drop any questions you have in the chat box. And of course, once the application opens, I will send additional guidance on completing the late liquidation extension request. But again, something to remember is you want to be thorough in your responses, so that way that doesn't have to be sent back by the department, or it doesn't have to be sent back by Ed. The quicker we can get this information in to Ed, the quicker we can get a response if it has been approved. So here are some resources. There's the technical guide for the American Rescue Plan, and also the technical guide for late liquidation. You can visit that to answer any more questions. Ed has pretty much taken everything they've used from ESSER and dropped it into ARP Homeless, except for they've scaled back some of the requirements that ESSER has to do. So ARP Homeless is not going to be near as lengthy or as daunting as ESSER is. So I encourage you to look at that. ARP Homeless Late Liquidation Extension letter from Ed. I also encourage you to take a look at that. McKinney Ventures subgrant authorized activities. Again, those align with ARP Homeless, except for the hotel motel. And then Schoolhouse Connection has a great article on maximizing your final ARP Homeless funds. And then NCHE has a lot of information as well on using and maximizing your ARP Homeless funding. And the moment everybody's been waiting for is the survey. Please, please, please give me your feedback on today's webinar. Let me know if this information was helpful, and what we can do to make adjustments, so that way I know how to make adjustments and be able to provide better professional development. Any other questions? Drop them in the chat box or unmute your line. And as usual, here's my contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about McKinney Vento programming, about ARP Homeless funding, late liquidation. I'm here to support you however I can. And then, of course, if you feel like any information was fraud, waste, or abuse today, or any of these slides, please contact this number. And I'm going to give you back, since you're a very quiet group today, about 20 minutes of your time, which I know you guys are very grateful for. Like I said, I know you're extremely busy. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. And thank you again for attending today.